The blood on Xander Preston's hands belonged to the mare he had just put down, and he hated himself for it, even though there had been no other choice. Buffalo, Wyoming in 1883 was not a forgiving place for animals that broke their legs, and the bay mare had stepped in a prairie dog hole during the cattle drive, snapping her forelegs so badly the bone had pierced through skin. Xander had done what needed doing, but as he walked away from the carcass with his rifle still warm in his grip, he felt hollowed out in a way that surprised him. He was a cowboy, had been since he was 14, and at 26 he should have been used to the harsh realities of frontier life. But something about the mare's trusting eyes as he had raised the gun made him feel like the worst kind of monster. He was still lost in these dark thoughts when he heard the sound that would change everything. It was a voice, soft and melodic, speaking words that sounded almost like a lullaby. Xander followed the sound around the bend in the creek where the herd had stopped to water, and what he saw made him freeze in his tracks. A woman knelt in the dirt beside a calf that had been born weak that morning. The ranch foreman had already declared it a lost cause, said they would leave it behind when they moved the herd at dawn. But here was this woman, her dark hair falling loose from its pins, her simple blue cotton dress dusty and wrinkled, cradling the calf's head in her lap. She was singing to it in a voice so pure and gentle that Xander felt something crack open in his chest. Her hands moved over the calf's ribs, massaging with a tenderness he had never seen another human being show to an animal. "Come on, sweetheart," she murmured to the calf. "I know you are tired, but you have got to try. Just a little bit. For me." Xander must have made some sound because her head snapped up, and he found himself staring into the most extraordinary pair of green eyes he had ever seen. They were the color of new spring grass, bright and alive in a face that was beautiful in an unconventional way. Her nose was a bit too long, her mouth a bit too wide, but something about the combination of her features struck him as perfect. More than that, though, was the expression in those eyes. There was no fear at being caught alone by a strange cowboy, no coyness or calculation. There was only a fierce protectiveness and a desperate hope. "Please do not take him away," she said, and her voice was steady despite the plea in her words. "I know what they said this morning, but he just needs time. He just needs someone to believe in him." Xander realized he was still holding his rifle and quickly leaned it against a nearby cottonwood tree. He held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I am not here to take him anywhere, miss. I was just passing through and heard your voice." She studied him for a long moment, and Xander felt as though she could see straight through to his soul. Then she nodded and turned her attention back to the calf. His mother rejected him. Sometimes they know when something is wrong, when a baby is too weak to survive. But sometimes they are wrong. Sometimes all it takes is a little help. Xander found himself walking closer, drawn by something he could not name. "You have done this before, saved weak calves." "I have saved all sorts of creatures," she said, and there was no boast in her words, just simple fact. Birds with broken wings, rabbits caught by cats, a fox kit whose mother was killed by dogs. Most of them lived. Some of them did not, but at least they knew kindness before they died. At least they knew that someone cared. The calf made a weak sound, and the woman shifted, supporting its head more carefully. "I need to get some milk into him. The chuck wagon cook said I could have some from the stores if I could manage to feed him. Would you help me? I need someone to hold him while I get the bottle." Xander did not hesitate. He dropped to his knees beside her and gently took the calf's head as she eased out from under it. He could feel the animal's heartbeat, fast and thready, could see the way its ribs showed too prominently under its hide. This was a creature on the edge of death, and yet the woman moved with such confidence as though she had no doubt of the outcome. She returned moments later with a glass bottle fitted with a rubber nipple filled with warm milk. "I am Miriam Banks," she said as she knelt beside him again. "I am traveling with my uncle. He is one of the ranch hands. I was supposed to stay in town, but I convinced him to let me come on the drive. I wanted to see the open country." "Xander Preston," he replied. I am the trail boss for this outfit. Her eyes widened slightly. Oh, then you are the one who makes the decisions about the herd. He understood what she was really asking. I am. And I am telling you that if you can get this calf strong enough to walk by dawn, he can come with us. I will make sure of it. The smile that broke across Miriam's face was like the sun coming up over the Bighorn Mountains. It was radiant and warm, and so full of joy that Xander felt his breath catch. Thank you, she said, and the words held a weight that told him she did not give her thanks lightly. They worked together to feed the calf, Miriam coaxing the bottle into its mouth while Xander supported its body. At first, the little creature seemed too weak to suckle, but Miriam was patient. She rubbed its throat, encouraged it with soft words, and eventually it began to drink. The sight of it swallowing the milk, its tail giving a feeble wag, made something warm bloom in Xander's chest. You really love them, he said quietly. Animals, I mean. Miriam nodded, her eyes never leaving the calf. They are so innocent, so trusting. They do not lie or cheat or hurt each other out of meanness. When they are cruel, it is only because they are hungry or afraid or protecting their young. There is a purity to that, a honesty. She paused, then added, I think animals are better than most people I have met. Xander thought about the mare he had just shot, about the way she had trusted him even as he raised the rifle. I put down a horse about an hour ago, he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Broke her leg badly. There was nothing else to be done, but I keep seeing her eyes. Miriam's hand found his arm, and the touch was gentle. That is because you have a good heart. The men who do not feel anything when they kill, those are the ones to worry about. You gave her a clean death, a quick one. That is a kindness too, even if it doesn't feel like it. They sat together as the sun began to set, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. The calf finished the bottle and let out a small burp that made Miriam laugh. It was a sound like wind chimes, light and musical, and Xander found himself smiling despite the heavy day. Will you sit with him tonight? Xander asked, to make sure he keeps improving. I will, Miriam said. I will not leave him alone. Then I will bring you a bedroll and some supper, Xander said, and I will check on you both through the night. You should not be out here by yourself. Miriam tilted her head, studying him again with those penetrating green eyes. You are not what I expected a trail boss to be like. The other men all seem so hard, so ready to fight or curse or hurt things. The frontier makes men hard, Xander said. You have to be tough to survive out here, but I think there is a difference between being tough and being cruel. My father taught me that before he died. He said a real man protects things that are weaker than himself. He does not take pleasure in causing pain. Your father sounds like he was a good man. He was. He died when I was 17, thrown from a horse, broke his neck. I have been working cattle ever since, trying to make him proud. Miriam's hand was still on his arm, and she squeezed gently. I think you do make him proud. I think he would be glad to know you grew up to be someone who cares about a mare's trusting eyes. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that felt both new and ancient. Xander had known plenty of women in his life, had even courted a few, but he had never felt this immediate understanding with anyone. It was as though Miriam could see all the parts of himself he usually kept hidden and accepted them without judgment. I should get that bedroll, he said, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. And your supper. Thank you, Xander, Miriam said, and the way she said his name made his heart do something strange in his chest. He stood and walked back toward the main camp, his mind spinning. He barely knew this woman, had only spoken to her for perhaps 30 minutes, but already she had lodged herself somewhere deep inside him. It was not just that she was pretty, though she was. It was the way she had looked at that dying calf, the gentleness in her hands, the fierceness in her voice when she asked him not to take the animal away. It was the purity of her love for creatures that could not defend themselves. That night, Xander brought Miriam a bedroll, a plate of beans and cornbread, and a cup of coffee. He found her still sitting with the calf, which was now resting more peacefully. She accepted the items with gratitude and insisted he sit with her while she ate. "Tell me about yourself," she said between bites. "Where are you from?" "Texas originally," Xander said. "A little town called Amarillo. My father had a small ranch there, but after he died, I could not keep it going on my own. I was too young, did not know enough, so I hired on with a cattle outfit and have been moving around ever since. I have worked drives from Texas to Kansas, Kansas to Montana, Montana to Wyoming. I go where the work is." "Do you ever miss having a home?" Miriam asked. "A place that is yours?" "Every day," Xander admitted. "But I have not found the right place yet. Or maybe I have not found the right reason to stay in one place." Miriam nodded slowly. "I understand that. I have lived in Buffalo my whole life, in the same little house on the edge of town. My parents died when I was 12. Yellow fever took them both within a week of each other. My uncle took me in, but he is a cowboy like you, always moving, always working. I stayed with his wife in town, but she passed last winter. Now I have no one except him, and he is gone more than he is home. I think that is why I wanted to come on this drive. I wanted to feel like I was going somewhere, even if it is just moving cattle from one place to another." "I am sorry about your parents," Xander said, "and your aunt. That is a lot of loss for one person." "It taught me that life is fragile," Miriam said softly. "It taught me that the time we have is precious. That is why I cannot stand to see animals suffer. They have even less time than we do, and most of them have such hard lives. The least I can do is try to ease their pain when I can." Xander looked at her in the firelight, at the way the flames cast golden shadows across her face, and he thought she was the most remarkable person he had ever met. There was a strength to her that had nothing to do with physical power, and everything to do with the courage of her convictions. She knew what she believed in, and she acted on those beliefs without hesitation. They talked for hours that night, long after Miriam had finished her supper. She told him about the animals she had rescued over the years, about the crow with the broken wing that had lived in her house for 3 months, about the strayed dog she had nursed back to health after it had been hit by a wagon. Xander found himself telling her things he had never shared with anyone, about his dreams of owning his own ranch someday, about the loneliness of the cowboy life, about the way he sometimes felt like he was just drifting through the world without purpose. "You have a purpose," Miriam said firmly. "You keep the herd safe. You make sure the cattle get where they need to go so people can eat. That matters." "It does not feel like enough," Xander said. "I want to build something, create something that lasts." "Then do it," Miriam said simply. "Find your land, build your ranch, create the life you want." "It is not that easy," Xander protested. "Land costs money. Cattle cost money. It takes capital to start a ranch." "Then save your money," Miriam said. "Work until you have enough. It might take years, but if it is what you truly want, it will be worth the wait." Xander smiled at her optimism. "You make it sound so simple." "Maybe it is simple, and we just make it complicated," Miriam said. She looked down at the calf, which was sleeping peacefully now. "Look at him. A few hours ago he was dying. Now he is resting, getting stronger. All it took was someone willing to try, willing to believe it was possible. Maybe your dreams are the same way. Maybe they just need someone to believe in them." "Maybe they need someone like you to believe in them," Xander said before he could stop himself. Miriam looked up at him, and something flickered in her eyes. "Maybe they do," she said softly. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Xander cleared his throat and stood. "I should let you rest. We have a long day tomorrow, and you will need your strength if you are going to walk alongside that calf. I will be ready, Miriam said. Thank you for sitting with me, Xander. It was nice to have company. It was nice for me too, Xander said, and he meant it more than she could know. He checked on Miriam twice more during the night, and each time he found her awake, keeping watch over the calf. By the time dawn broke over the plains, the little creature was standing on wobbly legs, butting its head against Miriam's hand in search of more milk. The transformation was remarkable, and when Xander saw it, he felt a surge of something that might have been hope. You did it, he said, walking over to where Miriam was feeding the calf another bottle. You saved him. We did it, Miriam corrected, smiling up at him. I could not have managed without your help last night. The drive continued that day, and true to his word, Xander made sure the calf came along. Some of the other cowboys grumbled about the extra work, but one look from Xander silenced their complaints. Miriam walked beside the calf for most of the day, encouraging it when it stumbled, feeding it every few hours, singing to it in that beautiful voice that made Xander's heart ache. He found excuses to ride near her throughout the day, ostensibly to check on the calf's progress, but really just to be close to her. They talked whenever he could spare a moment, and Xander found himself looking forward to those conversations more than anything else. Miriam had a way of seeing the world that was both practical and poetic. She noticed things other people missed, like the way the light hit the mountains or the pattern of clouds overhead. She found beauty in small moments, and being around her made Xander more aware of those moments too. On the third day of the drive, they came across a dog on the trail. It was a skinny, bedraggled thing, its ribs showing through matted fur, and it was limping badly on its front right leg. Most of the cowboys would have ridden right past it, but Miriam immediately dismounted from the wagon she had been riding in and approached the animal. Easy, sweetheart, she murmured, holding out her hand for the dog to sniff. No one is going to hurt you. The dog growled at first, its lips pulling back to show its teeth, but Miriam did not flinch. She just stayed still, letting the animal assess her. Gradually, the growling stopped, and the dog's tail gave a tentative wag. Miriam moved closer, still speaking in that gentle voice, and soon she was running her hands over the dog's body, checking for injuries. His paw is cut badly, she called back to Xander, who had stopped his horse nearby. It looks infected. He needs medicine and bandaging. We do not have much in the way of medical supplies for a dog, Xander said, though he was already dismounting. We have to save what we have for the men and the horses. Then I will use my own supplies, Miriam said firmly. I have some carbolic acid and clean cloth in my bag. That will do. She spent the next hour tending to the dog, cleaning its wound with a gentleness that made the animal relax, despite what must have been considerable pain. She bandaged the paw carefully, then offered the dog some of her own food and water. The dog ate ravenously, and by the time Miriam was finished, it was following her like a shadow. I think you have made a friend, Xander observed. I think he needs a friend, Miriam said, scratching the dog behind its ears. He has been on his own for a while by the looks of him. Probably got separated from a homestead or a wagon train. What are you going to do with him? Xander asked. Keep him, of course, Miriam said as though it was obvious. I cannot just leave him out here to die. Xander shook his head, but he was smiling. You're going to end up with a whole menagerie at this rate, between the calf and now the dog. Would that be so terrible? Miriam asked, her eyes sparkling. A life surrounded by creatures who love you unconditionally? No, Xander said slowly, looking at her in the afternoon sunlight with the dog pressed against her leg and joy written all over her face. No, that would not be terrible at all. That would be just about perfect. Something in his tone made Miriam look up sharply, and their eyes met and held. Xander saw the moment she understood what he was really saying, saw the slight catch of her breath and the flush that crept into her cheeks. But she did not look away, and neither did he. Xander, she said softly, and his name on her lips was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. I know we have only known each other a few days, Xander said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I know it is too soon to feel this way, too soon to say anything, but I cannot help it, Miriam. I cannot help the way I feel when I am around you. You are like no one I have ever met. The way you care for these animals, the way you see the world, the way you talk about life and dreams and purpose. You make me want to be better. You make me want to build that ranch, not just for myself, but for you, so you could have a place to care for all the lost and hurting creatures you find, so you could have a home that is truly yours. Miriam's eyes had grown bright with tears, and one spilled over to track down her cheek. Do you mean that? Do you really mean it? Every word, Xander said. He took a step closer to her, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. I think I have been waiting my whole life to meet someone like you. Someone who understands that being strong does not mean being cruel. Someone who fights for the things that cannot fight for themselves. Your love for these animals, it is the purest love I have ever seen, and I love you for that love you give so freely. The tears were flowing freely down Miriam's face now, but she was smiling. I have been alone for so long, she whispered. I thought no one would ever understand. Everyone in town thinks I am strange, the odd woman who takes in injured animals and talks to them like they are people. But you do not think that. You see me, really see me, and you do not turn away. I would never turn away from you, Xander said fiercely. Not in this lifetime or any other. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs, cradling her face in his hands. Miriam leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment. When she opened them again, they were full of an emotion that took his breath away. I am falling in love with you, she said simply. I know it is fast. I know we barely know each other, but I feel it. I feel it in my bones, in my heart. You are different from every other man I have met. You care about things that matter. You have a gentle soul in a hard world, and that is so rare, so precious. Xander felt as though his heart might burst from his chest. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Miriam only tilted her face up to meet his. Their first kiss was soft and sweet, a gentle brush of lips that somehow felt more intimate than anything Xander had ever experienced. He could taste the salt of her tears, could feel the way she sighed against his mouth, and he knew with absolute certainty that this was the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. The dog barked once, as if offering its approval, and Miriam laughed through her tears. Even he agrees, she said. What are we going to name him? Xander asked, looking down at the scruffy animal. How about Scout? Miriam suggested, because he found us out here on the trail. Scout it is, Xander agreed. He whistled, and the dog's tail wagged enthusiastically. Welcome to the family, Scout. The rest of the drive passed in a kind of golden haze for Xander. Every moment he could spare was spent with Miriam, and he found that the more time he spent with her, the deeper his feelings grew. She was endlessly patient with the calf, which she had named Clover, and with Scout, whose paw was healing well under her care. She had a gift for understanding what animals needed, for reading their body language and responding to their distress before it became critical. But it was not just her way with animals that captivated Xander. It was everything about her. The way she laughed at his stories, the way she listened when he talked about his dreams, the way she challenged him to think differently about the world. She was smart and funny and brave in ways that had nothing to do with guns or fistfights. She was brave enough to be vulnerable, brave enough to care deeply in a world that often punished such caring. One evening, about a week into the drive, they sat together by the campfire after the rest of the camp had gone to sleep. Clover was curled up at Miriam's feet, and Scout was stretched out between them. The stars were so bright overhead that it felt like they could reach up and touch them. Tell me about your perfect ranch, Miriam said, her head resting on Xander's shoulder. Describe it to me. Xander thought for a moment, but found that his vision had changed in the past week. Where before he had imagined a simple operation with cattle and horses, now he saw something more. It would be in a valley, he said slowly, somewhere with good grass and clean water. There would be a house, nothing fancy but solid and warm, big enough for a family, and there would be a barn, a good one, with plenty of room for animals. Not just the working stock, but the ones you rescue too. We could have pens for injured animals, a place where you could tend to them until they were well again. We? Miriam asked softly, lifting her head to look at him. Xander met her eyes steadily. We, if you will have me, Miriam, if you will take a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than money. I do not care about money, Miriam said. I care about you, about the man you are and the man you want to become. And yes, Xander, I will have you. I will take that chance, and I will help you build that dream. Xander kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring all of his feelings into the contact. When they broke apart, they were both flushed and breathing hard. I want to marry you, Xander said. I know it is fast. I know we should probably wait, but I do not want to wait. I do not want to spend one more day without knowing you are mine, and I am yours. Then ask me properly, Miriam said, her eyes shining. Xander slid off the log they were sitting on and knelt in the dirt before her. He took both of her hands in his and looked up into her face. Miriam Banks, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. Your capacity for love and kindness humbles me. Your strength and courage inspire me. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, building a home with you, protecting the things you care about. Will you marry me? Yes, Miriam said without hesitation. Yes, Xander Preston, I will marry you. They sealed the promise with another kiss, and Scout barked his approval while Clover let out a sleepy moo. It was not a fancy proposal. There was no ring or flowers or orchestra, but it was perfect because it was theirs. The next morning, Xander spoke to Miriam's uncle, a grizzled cowboy named Tom Banks. Tom had been watching the growing romance between his niece and the trail boss with a mixture of amusement and approval. When Xander asked for permission to marry Miriam, Tom clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to leave a bruise. About time someone made an honest woman of her, Tom said, though there was no real criticism in his words. She has been alone too long, that girl. Needs someone to look after her, though I suspect she will do most of the looking after in your marriage. I suspect you are right, Xander said with a grin. You treat her right, Tom said, his tone turning serious. She has been through enough pain in her life. She deserves to be happy. I will spend every day trying to make her happy, Xander promised. You have my word. They decided to get married as soon as the drive was over, in Buffalo, where Miriam had grown up. The plan was for Xander to collect his pay from this job, combine it with his savings, and start looking for land. It would not be enough to buy everything he wanted right away, but it would be a start. They could build slowly, grow the ranch over time. The rest of the drive passed without incident. Clover grew stronger each day, and by the time they reached their destination, the calf was keeping up with the herd without any help. Scout's paw healed completely, and the dog proved to be an excellent herder, naturally talented at keeping cattle in line. Xander joked that Miriam had not only saved the animals, but had also improved his operation. When they finally reached the ranch where the cattle were being delivered, Xander collected his pay and said goodbye to the crew. Some of the men he had worked with for years, and there were hearty handshakes and promises to cross paths again. But Xander knew his days of drifting from job to job were over. He had found his reason to settle down, and her name was Miriam. They returned to Buffalo in late summer, with the Wyoming landscape painted in golds and greens. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with wooden buildings and boardwalks. Miriam took him to the little church where her parents had been married, and where she had attended services all her life. The pastor, a kind man in his 60s named Reverend Hughes, agreed to marry them the following Saturday. The week before the wedding, Xander spent his days looking at properties around Buffalo, while Miriam prepared for the ceremony. There was not much to prepare as they were keeping it simple, but she wanted to make a new dress and arrange for a small gathering afterward. Tom gave them the use of his house for the reception, and some of the women in town who had known Miriam since childhood helped with the cooking. On Thursday, 3 days before the wedding, Xander found the property. It was about 5 miles outside of Buffalo, a beautiful piece of land with a creek running through it and views of the mountains in the distance. There was already a small cabin on the property, rough but livable, and a barn that needed some work but had good bones. The previous owner had given up on ranching after a hard winter and was eager to sell. The price was more than Xander had, but the man agreed to let him pay it off over time. They shook hands on the deal, and Xander rode back to town feeling like he was floating. He had land, he had a home, he had a place to bring his bride. He found Miriam at Tom's house, working on her dress with two of the neighbor women. When she saw his face, she set down her sewing and stood. "You found something," she said, reading him instantly. "I found everything," Xander said. He took her hands and pulled her outside, away from the curious ears of the other women. 5 miles north of town, 160 acres with water and good grass, a cabin and a barn. "It needs work, but it is ours, Miriam. It is our home." Miriam threw her arms around his neck, and Xander lifted her off her feet, spinning her around. When he set her down, she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Can we go see it right now?" "Right now," Xander agreed. They borrowed Tom's wagon and drove out to the property, with Scout running alongside and Clover, who had become something of a pet, trailing behind. When they crested the last hill and the land spread out before them, Miriam gasped. "Xander, it is beautiful," she breathed. And it was. The late afternoon sun cast everything in a golden glow, making the grass shimmer and the creek sparkle. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the summer heat. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, but it sat on a slight rise that would give them a view of the sunrise. The barn was larger, with space for horses and cattle, and plenty of room for Miriam's rescue animals. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring their new property, making plans for where they would expand the barn, where they could build a chicken coop, where Miriam wanted to plant a garden. Scout ran through the tall grass, barking with joy, and Clover grazed contentedly near the creek. It felt right in a way Xander had never experienced before. It felt like home. As the sun began to set, they sat on the porch of the cabin, Miriam tucked under Xander's arm. "I cannot believe this is real," she said quietly. "A week ago, I was just Tom's orphaned niece taking care of other people's animals and trying to find purpose. Now I am going to be your wife, and we have this beautiful land, and I get to spend my life doing what I love with the man I love." "I am the lucky one," Xander said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You make me want to be better, Miriam. You make me believe that good things are possible, even in a hard world." "Good things are possible," Miriam said firmly. "We just have to work for them and believe in them and not give up when things get difficult." Saturday arrived bright and clear, perfect weather for a wedding. Miriam wore the dress she had made, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. She had woven wildflowers into her dark hair, and Xander thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The ceremony was small, just Tom and a handful of townspeople who had known Miriam for years. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in feeling. When Xander said his vows, promising to love and cherish Miriam for all his days, he meant every word with his whole heart. And when Miriam promised the same, her green eyes bright with tears, he knew she meant it too. They sealed their marriage with a kiss, and the small gathering erupted in applause. Reverend Hughes pronounced them man and wife, and Xander felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was his path. This was his purpose. Not just drifting from job to job, but building a life with this incredible woman. The reception at Tom's house was lively, with fiddle music and dancing and more food than their small group could possibly eat. Xander danced with his bride under the stars, holding her close and marveling at how much his life had changed in just a few short weeks. One decision to check on a strange sound by the creek, and his entire world had shifted. "What are you thinking about?" Miriam asked, her head resting on his chest as they swayed to the music. "About fate," Xander said. "About how I almost did not investigate when I heard you singing to that calf. I almost just kept walking." "But you did not," Miriam said. "You came to see what was happening. You chose kindness over indifference. That is who you are, Xander. That is why I love you." They left the reception late that night and rode out to their new home. Xander had spent the previous day getting the cabin ready, cleaning it thoroughly and bringing in supplies. It was not much, just the bare necessities, but it was theirs. He carried Miriam over the threshold, both of them laughing, and then closed the door on the rest of the world. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a celebration of their love and their commitment to each other. Xander had been with women before, but this was different. This was not just physical desire, but something deeper, a joining of souls as much as bodies. Miriam was shy at first, but she trusted him, and that trust was more precious to Xander than gold. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking about their plans for the ranch. Miriam wanted to start small, rescuing animals from town and nursing them back to health. As their finances improved, she hoped to expand, maybe even create a sanctuary where people could bring injured animals. Xander loved listening to her dreams, loved the passion in her voice when she talked about helping creatures that had no one else. "I want children too," Miriam said softly, running her fingers through Xander's hair. "Someday, when we are more settled, I want a house full of laughter and love." "I want that too," Xander said. "I want to teach our sons to be gentle with animals, to stand up for what is right. I want to teach our daughters to be strong, to follow their hearts like you do." "We will be good parents," Miriam said with certainty, "because we know what it is like to lose our parents, to feel alone. We will make sure our children always know they are loved." The first months of their marriage were hard work, but deeply satisfying. Xander spent his days repairing fences, expanding the barn, and acquiring the first few head of cattle. Miriam worked alongside him when she could, but she also continued her rescue work. Word spread quickly through Buffalo that Miriam Preston would take in any injured animal, and people began showing up at their ranch with all manner of creatures. There was a hawk with a damaged wing, brought by a farmer who had found it in his field. Miriam set the wing carefully and kept the bird in a large cage Xander built for her, feeding it and changing its bandages until it could fly again. When they released it months later, watching it soar into the blue Wyoming sky, Miriam cried happy tears. There was a litter of kittens, abandoned by their mother and too young to survive on their own. Miriam fed them with an eyedropper every few hours around the clock until they were strong enough to eat on their own. They kept two of the kittens, naming them Salt and Pepper, and found homes for the rest. There was a horse, an old gelding, that had been beaten by his owner until he could barely stand. The sheriff had confiscated the animal and brought it to Miriam, knowing she would care for it. The horse, which they named Jasper, took months to recover physically and even longer to trust humans again. But Miriam was patient, spending hours each day just sitting with him, talking to him, letting him learn that not all people would hurt him. Eventually, Jasper became one of their most reliable horses, gentle and loyal. Through it all, Xander watched his wife with growing awe and love. Her compassion never seemed to run out. No matter how tired she was, no matter how much work she had already done that day, she always had time for one more injured creature. And she never asked for recognition or praise. She did it simply because it needed to be done, because she could not bear to turn away from suffering. Their first winter was brutal. Wyoming winters were harsh under the best circumstances, and that year was particularly bad. Temperatures dropped well below zero, and snow drifted as high as the cabin windows. Xander spent long hours each day breaking ice on the creek so the animals could drink, hauling hay to the cattle, making sure everything was secured against the wind. Miriam worried constantly about the animals, checking on them multiple times a day despite the cold. She brought Scout and the cats into the cabin, made sure Jasper and the other horses had extra hay and blankets, even built a small heated area in the barn for a rabbit with a respiratory infection. One particularly bad night, when the wind was howling like a living thing and the temperature had dropped to 30 below, Miriam woke Xander in a panic. "The cattle," she said. "We have to check on them. I have a bad feeling." Xander wanted to tell her it was too dangerous, that they should wait until morning, but he had learned to trust Miriam's instincts when it came to animals. They bundled up in every piece of warm clothing they owned and fought their way through the blizzard to the pasture where they kept their small herd. What they found made Xander's blood run cold. Several of the cattle had huddled together against a fallen tree, trying to escape the wind, but one young steer had gotten separated from the group and was lying in a snowdrift. Xander could barely see the animal through the driving snow, but Miriam went straight to it, dropping to her knees in the deep snow. "He is still alive," she shouted over the wind, "but just barely. We have to get him to the barn." It took both of them working together to get the steer to its feet and guide it back to the barn. By the time they got the animal inside and rubbed down, both Xander and Miriam were dangerously cold. Their hands were numb, their faces felt like they had been scoured with sandpaper. But Miriam would not rest until she had made sure the steer was warming up and had food and water. "You could have died out there," Xander said when they finally made it back to the cabin. His voice came out harsher than he intended, driven by the fear that had gripped him when he realized how close they had come to disaster. "That steer is not worth your life, Miriam." Miriam turned to face him, her cheeks still red from the cold, her eyes fierce. "Every life is worth saving, Xander. That is what I believe. That is who I am. If you cannot accept that, then you married the wrong woman." Xander felt his anger drain away, replaced by a deep shame. "I am sorry," he said, reaching for her. "I was just scared. When I realized how cold you were, how dangerous it was out there, all I could think was that I could lose you. And I cannot lose you, Miriam. You are everything to me." Miriam softened, stepping into his embrace. "I am sorry too. I should not have snapped at you. I know you were just worried, but you have to understand. I cannot ignore an animal in distress. It is not in me to turn away." "I know," Xander said, holding her tight. "I know, and I love you for it. I just need you to be careful. I need you to remember that you matter too, that your life has value beyond what you can do for others." "I will try," Miriam promised. "If you will try to remember that sometimes the risk is worth it. Sometimes saving a life, even an animal's life, is the most important thing we can do." They warmed each other up that night, grateful to be alive and together, and the young steer survived, growing into a strong bull that would become the foundation of their herd. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle that had survived the harsh winter began to calve, and Xander and Miriam spent long nights in the barn, assisting with difficult births and making sure the newborns were healthy. Miriam had a gift for calving, somehow knowing exactly when to intervene and when to let nature take its course. Under her watchful eye, they did not lose a single calf that spring. The land itself seemed to wake up, with wildflowers blooming across the pastures and the creek running high with snowmelt. Miriam planted her garden, putting in vegetables and herbs, and Xander built a proper chicken coop. They acquired a few pigs and planned to get sheep the following year. It was around this time that Miriam realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when she was certain, she decided to tell Xander in a special way. She waited until evening, when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, and then took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is someone who wants to meet you," she said softly, "but you will have to wait about 7 months." Xander looked at her blankly for a moment, and then understanding dawned. His face went through a series of expressions so quickly that Miriam almost laughed. Shock, disbelief, wonder, and finally, pure joy. Are you saying, are we are going to have a baby? Miriam confirmed, and then she did laugh as Xander let out a whoop that probably carried all the way to town. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down, looking worried. I should not have done that. Are you all right? Should you be sitting down? Do you need water? I am pregnant, not made of glass, Miriam said, though she was touched by his concern. I am perfectly healthy, and the baby is fine. A baby, Xander breathed, sitting down heavily on the porch step. We are going to be parents. We are, Miriam agreed, sitting beside him and taking his hand again. Are you happy? Happy does not even begin to cover it, Xander said. He turned to look at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. You have given me everything, Miriam. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God for you every single day. You deserve it because you are a good man, Miriam said. Because you see me, really see me, and you love me anyway. Because you share my dreams and help me make them real. Because you are going to be an amazing father. They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and talked about the future. They discussed names, though it felt too early to decide. They talked about what kind of parents they wanted to be, how they would raise their child to be kind and strong and compassionate. They wondered if it would be a boy or a girl, though Xander insisted he did not care as long as the baby and Miriam were healthy. The pregnancy was not easy for Miriam. She was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down. Xander did his best to care for her, bringing her tea and crackers, rubbing her back when the nausea was especially bad. He took over more of the ranch work, insisting that Miriam rest, though she protested that she was perfectly capable of doing her share. You are growing our child, Xander said firmly. That is the most important work there is right now. Let me handle the rest. As her belly grew, Miriam found it harder to move around, but that did not stop her from continuing her rescue work. A boy brought her a baby raccoon whose mother had been killed, and Miriam bottle fed it until it was old enough to release back into the wild. A neighbor brought a dog that had been hit by a wagon, its back leg badly broken. Miriam set the leg and cared for the dog for months, and when it finally healed, the neighbor gave the dog to them as thanks. They named her Lady, and she became fast friends with Scout. In early December, when the first snow of winter was just beginning to fall, Miriam went into labor. Xander had ridden into town weeks earlier to arrange for the doctor to come when the time arrived, but the baby had other ideas. Miriam's labor came on fast and hard, with no time to send for help. Xander had assisted with countless animal births, but this was different. This was his wife, the woman he loved more than life itself, and she was in pain. He tried to stay calm, tried to remember everything the doctor had told him during their visit, but inside he was terrified. Miriam was incredible. Even in the midst of contractions that made her cry out, she stayed focused. She told Xander what she needed, guided him through the process, and when the time came to push, she gave it everything she had. Their son was born just after midnight, arriving in a rush with a lusty cry that filled the cabin. Xander cut the cord with shaking hands and wrapped the baby in a clean blanket before placing him in Miriam's arms. She looked exhausted and beautiful, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her face flushed, but when she looked down at their son, her expression was pure love. He is perfect, she whispered. He is, Xander agreed, sitting on the edge of the bed and putting his arm around his wife. You are amazing. You are the strongest person I have ever known. They named him William, after Xander's father, with the middle name Thomas after Miriam's uncle. Baby William had a shock of dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and from the moment he was born, he had his parents wrapped around his tiny finger. The next few months were exhausting but wonderful. William was a good baby, only fussy when he was hungry or needed changing, and he seemed to love being on the ranch. Miriam would take him outside wrapped in blankets, letting him feel the sun on his face and hear the sounds of the animals. Scout appointed himself the baby's guardian, always staying close and growling at anything he perceived as a threat. Tom came to visit when William was 2 weeks old, riding out from town with a wooden cradle he had made himself. The old cowboy was gruff as always, but there were tears in his eyes when he held his great nephew for the first time. "He looks like you did as a baby," he told Miriam. "Your mother would have been so proud." "Thank you for the cradle," Miriam said, hugging her uncle. "It is beautiful." "It was the least I could do," Tom said. "You two are making something good out here, something that lasts. That is more than most people can say." As William grew, the ranch continued to flourish. Word of Miriam's gift with animals spread beyond Buffalo, and people began bringing creatures from miles away. She treated them all with the same care and dedication, never turning anyone away. Xander built additional pens and enclosures, creating a proper sanctuary area where recovering animals could stay. The ranch also became known for the quality of its cattle. Xander had an eye for good stock, and his herd was healthy and strong. He was able to sell his beef for premium prices, and the money allowed them to expand. They built a proper house, larger than the cabin, with enough room for a growing family and plenty of space for Miriam's rescue work. They kept the cabin and converted it into a clinic of sorts, with clean surfaces for treating injuries and plenty of storage for supplies. William grew into a curious, energetic toddler who adored the animals as much as his mother did. His first word was not mama or dada, but cow, and he toddled after Miriam whenever she was working with the animals, wanting to help. She taught him to be gentle, to move slowly, so he did not startle the creatures, and William absorbed it all like a sponge. When William was 3, Miriam became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she was able to work almost up until her due date. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose after the wildflowers that grew all over the ranch, was born on a warm spring morning. She had her father's dark hair and a fierce cry that suggested a strong personality. Rose was followed 2 years later by another daughter, Elizabeth, who was quiet and thoughtful from the start. The ranch house was indeed full of laughter and love, exactly as Miriam had dreamed. The children grew up surrounded by animals, learning compassion and responsibility from their mother, and strength and integrity from their father. Xander loved watching Miriam with their children. She was patient and kind, but also firm when she needed to be. She taught them to read by reading stories about animals, taught them math by having them help measure feed and supplies. She made learning fun, made it relevant to their lives on the ranch. One evening, when William was 8 and already showing signs of becoming a skilled horseman, Xander found Miriam sitting on the porch watching the sunset. The children were asleep inside, and the ranch was quiet except for the usual animal sounds. He sat beside her and took her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how blessed we are," Miriam said. "When I think back to that day on the cattle drive, when I was trying to save that calf and you came around the bend, it feels like a lifetime ago. But it also feels like yesterday." "I know what you mean," Xander said. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that I get to wake up next to you every morning, that we built all of this together." "We did build it together," Miriam said. "That is what makes it so special. This is not your ranch or my ranch. It is ours. These are our children, our animals, our dreams made real. Your love for animals, it is still the purest love I have ever seen," Xander said. "Even after all these years, even with everything else you do, you still give so freely to every creature that needs help. That love you give, it inspires me every day. It makes me want to be better. And your steady strength, your unwavering support, that is what allows me to give that love," Miriam said. "I could not do any of this without you, Xander. You are my partner in every sense of the word." They sat together in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the stars come out one by one. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully. In the barn and various enclosures around the ranch, the animals they cared for rested, safe, and protected. It was a life built on love and hard work, on shared dreams, and unwavering commitment to each other and to the creatures that could not protect themselves. As the years continued to pass, the Preston Ranch became known throughout Wyoming and beyond. People came from all over to learn from Miriam about animal care, and several young women apprenticed with her, wanting to learn her techniques. Xander trained young cowboys, teaching them that being tough did not mean being cruel, that real strength included compassion. William grew into a fine young man, as skilled with animals as his mother, and as honest and hard-working as his father. Rose became a teacher, moving to town but visiting the ranch often, always bringing injured animals she had found. Elizabeth surprised everyone by becoming interested in veterinary medicine, something that was just beginning to be recognized as a formal profession. Through it all, Xander and Miriam's love only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course, their moments of frustration and worry. Raising children and running a ranch while also operating an animal sanctuary was not easy work, but they faced every challenge together, always coming back to the foundation of love and respect they had built. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Xander took Miriam back to the spot where they had first met. The creek was still there, still flowing clear and cold. The prairie grass still waved in the breeze. So much had changed, but so much had stayed the same. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Xander asked, his arm around Miriam's waist. "I said a lot of things," Miriam replied with a smile. "Which part?" "You said that animals were better than most people, that their love was pure and honest." "I still believe that," Miriam said, "though I have learned that some people can love that purely too. You taught me that, Xander. You showed me that human love can be just as constant and true as an animal's loyalty." "You taught me more than I ever taught you," Xander said. "You taught me that being vulnerable is not weakness, that caring deeply is a strength, that love, real love, is not about possession or control. It is about supporting and cherishing and celebrating the person you love exactly as they are." Miriam turned in his arms to face him, her green eyes still as bright as they had been 20 years ago. "I love you, Xander Preston. I loved you when you were a trail boss with a dream. I loved you when we were struggling through that first winter. I love you now, with our children grown and our ranch thriving. And I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Miriam Preston," Xander said. "Your love for animals was the purest love I had ever seen, and I loved you for that love you gave so freely. But I also love you for 1,000 other reasons, for your courage and your kindness and your stubborn determination, for the way you laugh and the way you cry, for being my partner and my best friend, for giving me a life beyond anything I ever imagined." They kissed there beside the creek, with 20 years of love and memories between them, and hopefully many more years ahead. The sun was setting, painting the Wyoming sky in those familiar shades of gold and pink and purple. Somewhere in the distance, cattle were lowing. A bird sang its evening song. The world turned on, wild and beautiful, and sometimes harsh. But here in this moment, there was only love. When they returned to the ranch that evening, their children had prepared a surprise celebration. The house was decorated with wildflowers, and there was a feast laid out on the table. Friends and neighbors had gathered, people whose animals Miriam had saved over the years, cowboys Xander had worked with and trained. There was music and dancing and laughter, and toasts to the couple who had built something beautiful in the wild Wyoming landscape. Late that night, after the guests had gone home and the children had finally gone to bed, Xander and Miriam stood on their porch looking out over the ranch. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light. In the barn, a mare Miriam was treating for an injury nickered softly. In the house, their children slept peacefully, dreaming their own dreams. "No regrets?" Xander asked quietly. "Not a single one," Miriam said. "This life, this love, It is everything I ever wanted and more than I knew to ask for. Same here, Xander said, pulling her close. Same here. They stood together under the stars, two people who had found each other by chance or fate or divine intervention, and who had chosen each other every day since. The love story that had started with a dying calf and a cowboy's curiosity had grown into something vast and enduring, something that would echo through generations. Years later, when they were old and gray, they would sit in rocking chairs on that same porch and tell their grandchildren stories. Stories about the cattle drive where they met, about the animals they had saved, about building a ranch from nothing but dreams and determination. And those grandchildren would grow up understanding that love, real love, was not just romance and passion. It was showing up every day. It was supporting your partner's dreams. It was caring for the things that could not care for themselves. It was building something together that was greater than the sum of its parts. The Preston Ranch would continue for generations, always maintaining Miriam's commitment to animal welfare alongside the practical business of ranching. It would become a model for how to balance profit with compassion, how to work with the land rather than against it. And at the center of it all would be the love story of Xander and Miriam, the cowboy and the woman who loved animals with the purest love he had ever seen. On a spring morning many years after that 20th anniversary, when Miriam was in her 70s and Xander was 78, they welcomed their first great-grandchild into the world. It was a boy, born right there on the ranch in the house Xander had built all those decades ago. When the baby was placed in Miriam's arms, she looked down at the tiny face and saw the future stretching out ahead. "What should we name him?" their granddaughter asked. Miriam looked at Xander, who was sitting beside her with his arm around her shoulders, still her constant companion after more than 50 years of marriage. They had weathered so much together: hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and financial struggles, the normal trials of raising children, and the extraordinary challenges of running both a ranch and an animal sanctuary. Through it all, their love had been the constant, the foundation everything else was built on. "I think we should let his parents choose," Miriam said with a smile. "But whatever you name him, teach him to be kind. Teach him to protect things that are weaker than himself. Teach him that love is not weakness, but the greatest strength of all." "We will," her granddaughter promised, "just like you and Grandpa taught all of us." That evening, as the sun set over the ranch one more time, Xander and Miriam walked slowly to the creek where they had first met. It was harder now, with old bones and joints that ached, but they still made the journey on special occasions. This felt like a special occasion, the birth of a new generation, the continuation of the legacy they had built. "Do you remember what I told you that first night?" Miriam asked as they sat on the bank of the creek, their feet dangling in the cold water. "You told me a lot of things," Xander said, echoing their conversation from years ago. "I told you that if you could get that calf strong enough to walk by dawn, you would let him come with us," Miriam said. "And you said you would make sure of it. You kept that promise, Xander, but more than that, you have kept every promise you ever made to me. You built me the ranch so I could care for animals. You supported me even when other people thought I was crazy for caring so much about creatures that could not thank me or pay me back. You loved me exactly as I was, not who you wanted me to be." "That was easy," Xander said. "You were already perfect." Miriam laughed, the sound a bit creaky now, but still musical. "I was never perfect. I was stubborn and impulsive, and I worried too much about animals and not enough about our finances." "You worried about what mattered," Xander corrected. "You taught our children and grandchildren that money is not the measure of a life well lived, that kindness and compassion are worth more than gold. You taught me that too." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. Xander thought about the young cowboy he had been, drifting from job to job without purpose or direction. He thought about the moment he had heard Miriam's voice singing to that calf and made the decision to investigate instead of walking away. That single choice had changed the entire trajectory of his life, had given him everything he held dear. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Miriam asked. "For loving me, for choosing me, for building this life with me, for every single day of the past 50 plus years." Miriam leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting into the space that seemed made for her. "Thank you for seeing me, for understanding me, for loving the parts of me that other people found strange or difficult, for giving me the life I did not even know I was dreaming of." They sat together until the moon rose, bright and full, and then slowly made their way back to the house. Their children and grandchildren were there. Multiple generations gathered under one roof, and the house was full of noise and life and love. Scout had been gone for decades now, as had Clover and Jasper, and so many other animals they had loved and lost. But there were new dogs sleeping by the fire, new cats curled up in sunny spots, new horses in the barn waiting for morning. The cycle continued, as it always had, as it always would. Life and death, joy and sorrow, love and loss. But through it all, the Preston Ranch stood as a testament to what two people could build when they shared a vision and worked together toward a common goal. When they loved each other not just despite their differences, but because of them. When they chose each other every single day, no matter what challenges arose. Xander Preston had been a wandering cowboy when he met Miriam Banks by a creek in Wyoming. He had been searching for purpose, for meaning, for a reason to settle down. What he found was a woman who loved animals with a purity and devotion that humbled him. Her love for those creatures, her willingness to fight for things that could not fight for themselves, had shown him what real strength looked like. And he had loved her for that love she gave so freely, had loved her for her courage and compassion and unwavering principles. Together they had built not just a ranch, but a legacy. They had raised children who understood that being tough did not mean being cruel, that caring deeply was a virtue, not a weakness. They had created a sanctuary where animals could heal and people could learn. They had proved that it was possible to be successful without sacrificing your values, to make a living while still making a difference. And most importantly, they had loved each other. Through good times and bad, through challenges and triumphs, through the mundane daily work of life and the extraordinary moments that took their breath away, they had chosen each other every single day, had supported and encouraged and cherished each other. Their love had been the bedrock everything else was built on, the constant that never wavered. As Xander and Miriam climbed into bed that night, surrounded by family and the sounds of the ranch they had built together, they held each other close. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the grass. The horses shifted in their stalls. A calf called for its mother. An owl hooted in the darkness. The world turned on, wild and beautiful and full of both cruelty and kindness. But here, in this house on this ranch, there was love. There was family. There was purpose and meaning and the satisfaction of a life well lived. There was the knowledge that they had made a difference, had left the world a little bit better than they found it. There was the comfort of growing old with the person who knew you best and loved you most. "Good night, my love," Miriam whispered. "Good night," Xander replied. "I will love you forever." "And I will love you forever," Miriam said. They fell asleep in each other's arms, the way they had thousands of times before, secure in the love they had built and the life they had created together. The cowboy and the woman who loved animals, two souls who had found each other in the Wild West and had never let go. Their love story had started with a dying calf and a kind heart, and it had grown into something legendary, something that would be remembered and retold for generations to come. The Preston Ranch still stands today, run by the descendants of Xander and Miriam, still operating as both a working cattle ranch and an animal sanctuary. The original cabin has been preserved, converted into a small museum that tells the story of the couple who built the ranch. Visitors can see Miriam's journals, where she recorded every animal she treated, and what happened to them. They can see Xander's carefully kept ledgers, tracking the ranch's growth from a small operation to a thriving enterprise. They can see photographs of the couple at various ages, always together, always with animals around them. But more than the physical artifacts, the spirit of Xander and Miriam lives on. It lives on in the way the ranch operates, with compassion and respect for all creatures. It lives on in the family members who choose to continue the work, who carry on the traditions of caring for animals and the land. It lives on in the countless animals that have been saved over the generations, and in the people who learned from the Preston example that success and kindness are not mutually exclusive. The love story of Xander Preston and Miriam Banks, the cowboy and the woman who loved animals with the purest love, is a testament to what is possible when two people find each other and build something together, when they choose love over cynicism, compassion over indifference, hope over despair, when they work hard and support each other and never give up on their dreams or each other. It is a story that began beside a creek in Wyoming in 1883, and it is a story that continues to this day, echoing through time, inspiring new generations to believe in love and kindness and the power of two people committed to making the world a better place. It is a reminder that sometimes the most important moment in your life comes when you choose to investigate a strange sound instead of walking away, when you choose to care instead of remaining indifferent, when you choose to love instead of protecting your heart. Xander and Miriam lived long, full lives, surrounded by the family and animals they loved. When they finally passed, many years later, and within months of each other, they were buried on a hill overlooking their ranch, under a tree they had planted together on their first anniversary. Their graves are marked with simple stones that read Xander Preston, beloved husband and father, and Miriam Preston, beloved wife and mother. But if you look closely, you will see smaller inscriptions added by their children. He taught us strength with kindness, and she showed us the power of love. And that is the true legacy of Xander and Miriam Preston. Not the ranch, though it prospers to this day. Not the animals saved, though they number in the thousands. Not even the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, though they carry on the work and the values. The true legacy is the lesson they taught through their lives and their love, that being tough does not mean being cruel, that caring deeply is the greatest strength of all, and that love, real love, can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities and generations. The cowboy loved the woman for the pure love she gave to animals, for the compassion and courage that drove her to help creatures that could not help themselves. And in loving her, he became a better man. He learned to see the world through her eyes, to value gentleness alongside strength, to understand that protecting the weak was not weakness, but the truest form of courage. Together they built a life and a legacy that proved love is not just a feeling, but an action, a choice made every day to put someone else's needs alongside your own, to build something together that is greater than what either could build alone. Their story, which began with a dying calf and a cowboy's decision to see what was happening instead of walking away, became a love story for the ages. A reminder that the smallest choices can have the biggest consequences, that a moment of kindness can change the trajectory of a life, that love, when it is real and true and built on mutual respect and shared values, can overcome any obstacle and endure any trial. The sun sets over the Preston Ranch, as it has for over a century now, painting the Wyoming sky in those same shades of gold and pink and purple. The cattle low in the distance. The horses stamp in their stalls. Somewhere, an injured animal is being tended with gentle hands and soft words. And somewhere, a couple is falling in love, learning what Xander and Miriam knew, that the purest form of love is one that cherishes and protects, that builds up rather than tears down, that sees the best in others and helps them become it. This is the story of Xander Preston and Miriam Banks, of the cowboy and the woman who loved animals, of two souls who found each other in the Wild West and built a love that lasted beyond their lifetimes. It is a story of compassion and courage, of dreams fulfilled and challenges overcome, of a family built on love and values that endure. It is a story that reminds us that the best stories are not fairy tales, but real lives lived with intention and purpose, and above all, with love. And so the Preston Ranch continues, a living monument to the love story that created it, a place where animals are still treated with dignity and respect, where people still learn that kindness is strength and compassion is courage, where the legacy of Xander and Miriam lives on, in every animal saved, in every lesson taught, in every couple who looks at each other and chooses love, every single day, just as Xander and Miriam did for more than 5 decades. This is their story. This is their legacy. This is the proof that love, when it is pure and true and built to last, can change the world. One ranch, one family, one animal at a time.